We're live.
Hey everybody, Frederick Towns here, creator of W3 Total Cash, and at the moment quite a infrequent participant in lots of aspects of the community, spoken at a number of WordCamps over the years, and wish I could have participated in WordSesh last year as well, but I wanted to share with you guys a little bit of the stuff that was learned in trying to monetize W3 Total Cash after having it be an entirely free product for, I don't know, more than 4 years or so. So there's been about 4 million downloads. There's a lot of forum activity. It's kind of a complicated product solving a challenging problem in a niche that I don't think is nearly as popular as other optimization areas. And a lot of people don't realize, but it's actually a product that's still in beta. And so, having said that, it means there's a strategy that we've employed to try to chip away at the optimization problem with respect to performance of websites and applications. And so some of the pitfalls that we've seen over the years, I think, WordSesh exists to really share some of the either the challenges or the best practices, the lessons learned, the things to do differently, so we can kind of be folks who've got experiences can be those folks who are the shortcut or the secret weapon or the unfair advantage or the helpers. So hopefully this is helpful. So one of the biggest things is that when you make distributed software, where people kind of like if if a lot of the folks watching are Americans, they'll probably and old enough, they'll probably remember America Online and how they used to just fill your mailbox with CDs, every week or other week to attempt you to install the software, which is probably the equivalent of when WordPress first came out with the famous 5-minute install. That was the equivalent of getting that CD out of your mailbox physically and then getting it into your machine and waiting for it to finally load everything up. Or actually waiting for the honor to dial up to AOL and start downloading the rest of the stuff that they couldn't put on the disk. So anyway, the install problem is quite often not a problem for folks who are tapped into the community and have spent time figuring that out. A lot of the folks that you see as successful have spent a lot of time actually figuring that out. And there's a number of solutions to that problem, but I won't get into them. The thing I really wanted to talk about was product. And so one of the largest pitfalls has been something that I kind of consider to be a notion composed of two things. That notion would be called, I don't know, the challenge of innovation or the challenge of creating value or the challenge of differentiation of your product in a crowded space with lots of competitors, things like that. But anyway, two parts. One part is having a passion and a vision for the problem that you're solving. It's kind of like, for us, caching is just one of the toughest problems in software engineering and computer science. So it's not that it's a passion out of necessity. It's a passion because it's one of those things, when you do it right, it's beautiful. And when you do it wrong, it's really bad. And caches are everywhere, from the trunk of your car to the to the hard disk in your computer. It might look like persistent storage, but give it some time, it'll find a way to delete itself. And so, anyway, the point is that having a point of view, having a passion, and having a vision mean that you have some of the key ingredients there for leadership, right? And leadership in the software world means taking that point of view and putting fingers to keyboard and producing something. The rest of the value creation kind of coin, or the other side of it, is figuring out and understanding how to communicate and message to people who are interacting with your product. So for us, that's still an ongoing challenge. I don't know that it's something that you ever finish, but it still remains the key component or a key ingredient. So those two things are a coin. You can't have one without the other, or yin and yang, whatever you want to say. Those are the things that we spend the most time thinking about. And so in order to kind of set ourselves up for success in a world where distributed software is not a bad paradigm, I mean, everything has got good and bad qualities, but in a world where the trade-off is definitely not as convenient compared to software as a service, right, where things are hosted, what do you do about it? Well, I kind of just gave away one of the points, is you look at, what you can do to make it easier for yourself to iterate, right? So when you make a mistake, which is inevitable because no one's perfect, or a customer makes a mistake, and you can help them by improving the messaging in your product, making it really easy for them to take a step that appears to be repeated often, which is part of the beauty of software, right? You can solve a problem and you save millions of hours over the course of years of various people's time. Or you can remove something completely because it is unused, it's unhelpful, the market has changed, technology has changed, or you were wrong in terms of how you initially thought about solving some problem. So going from there, one of the things that we really saw was, having a beta product for so long, it's totally confusing to people, right? 44 million downloads, decent rating over the years, and a number of sites using the product means that the typical customer user, and you might break your industry into, or your target market into, various cohorts and target some of them kind of directly, but what ends up happening is the lowest common denominator, or the average person, ends up kind of getting into trouble. And so the thing there that really was kind of shocking for us is, like, for example, when someone says, hey, I want to use professional services, I want you guys to go in there, take a look at my, in this case, content, look at my plugin, my theme, my server, and help me figure out how to use this framework to optimize, my particular set of circumstances. Folks would think that would take, I don't know what they take. I think it would take, I think, we haven't actually asked because they usually tell us, we think it should be faster. But one of the challenges there is that, there's not really, or we haven't come across, and we're continuing to work on this, we haven't really discovered the magic set of words or set of kind of onboarding material or follow-up material, or, etc., that allows us to communicate to people what work it is that we're doing. And so that's one of the challenges that you have, and exists in the product even if you don't have services, or you don't have people, professionals around your product trying to use it, trying to add value through services as well. So this is one of those things where how you communicate, how you message, what you say no to, how you say no, like what you don't do and what you do are particularly tricky. And again, we have it in the product itself as well, because a lot of people aren't technical, right? That's part of the reason why developers are hopefully compensated so well, is because they're creating value in just about everything that they do when people use it. So that was one of the big things that we continue to work on, is how do we communicate, how do we set expectations, how do we let people know, how do we get on the same page with people with various degrees of understanding. I think the second large thing that we've worked on is when you try to bring monetization into the fold, and by that I don't mean just a professional services, because most people in the WordPress community that have begun have either done some work for free and learned how to serve others, or they've charged money for it because they wanted to. So there's a lot more to say there, and I'll try to see if there's any questions. We can go back to that. But the key point is, the key next point is, we're seeing that in trying to originate or generate subscriptions to the product, again, with this the kind of long cycle that you have just naturally in distributed software, how do we manage licensing? How do we manage, what type of licenses do we offer? What does support look like, right? Are we including some support? Are we not? If we're not, why not? If we are, why are we? And so the thought process around those key areas was, hey, support's really hard. In a perfect world, there'd be a number of people who were also subject matter experts, who also had the time to participate in forums, and also had the ability to communicate really well digitally, because some of the material we have just requires voiceover. you know, some of those things would come into place. And fortunately for us, the WordPress community makes that, you know, pretty straightforward, right? There's a number of people going to the forums, you know, who use the product. There's a number of people who find the time somehow, you know, to try to answer questions that are at an altitude that they can address. And so that's been a wonderful thing. The thing we could do better is we could, you know, cultivate that community more. And so some topics lend themselves to it. You know, like if you look at Moz.com, I mean, those guys crush it in community. You know, we've seen a number of other people in the WordPress space do a phenomenal job with community. That's one component that's not to be kind of under or overlooked. The next thing is, you know, how you can figure out what it is that, again, in distributed software, that's causing people to, you know, abandon the product. You know, in other words, what's causing attrition, what's causing people to churn out, what's making things challenging for folks. And so there's a number of things that we think about. And so one of those is we added edge mode to W3 Total Cache. And I think WordCamp Europe, I mentioned this on stage, and and it was actually an interesting thing that Matt Mullenweg noticed as well. But I'm pretty sure that other people have done this and just called it something else. It's just the notion that you have the user opt in to seeing some features that are a little more rough around the edges than the rest of the product. So again, already a beta product, so it's kind of like, you know, choose your own adventure in that regard. And then step two is, hey, there's a bunch of things that we kind of want to have you experience, but we don't necessarily want to, you know, we don't necessarily want to force people who are kind of in a stable orbit with using the product into, you know, a particular kind of experience, right? Or force them to try things out. In addition to the fact that, you know, in a perfect world, there's a period of time when you're optimizing things, whether it's your SEO or your performance or what have you, where you're in a stable state, right? There's nothing really to worry about because you've addressed the latest round of issues and you can get back to, you know, publishing or whatever it is you're doing. So, excuse me, that's one of the biggest things is for us has been thinking through how to remove friction and allowing people to subscribe, and then while doing that, making sure that we can not negatively impact those people who have gotten their configuration of the framework to a place that they're comfortable with. Conversely, when people are comfortable, we have the opposite problem where there's some new value that they should definitely unlock because it universally affects either the settings they have active or everybody who cares about performance. So if I had to boil it down to those two things, and every product is different, which is making it difficult for me to say, hey, specifically do this, everyone, those are two key things to think about. So, well, let me just do this. Let's jump into a question. Do you think security software against unauthorized use is worth our work? Because everything you provide in your code can be disabled, removed, like authenticating, so if someone likes to crack it, he will do it anyway. This is a perfect question. I realized this as soon as, well, before deciding to even try to monetize the software rather than you know, continue to rely on either professional services or just, you know, the money my wife did not mind me investing in this project. I think the biggest thing, and this actually came up at the very first Pressnomics with a very smart young man. The core thing here is if people want to steal, they're going to steal, right? It's just one of those things. And so I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about that because I can't really do anything about it. And so it's definitely not, in my experience, in my opinion, it's definitely not worth the work. I think the thing that is worth the work is focusing on, so here's the thing that's totally counterintuitive, and this is why I really like this question. The thing that's super counterintuitive is that the folks who have the work, have the time to steal from you and have like the ability to do the work to steal, right? And I'm assuming obviously that someone doesn't pass around a crack for software like they used to, okay? well, maybe they still do. I don't know. But anyway, since the likelihood that someone, especially in the WordPress community, is going to be able to pass around a crack or write a blog post that gets shared out constantly, and not have and not have someone just like the author not eventually patch that, or have people that are talking about how to crack that software be like, shame on you, is just really, really slim. It's far more likely, just probabilistically, right? It's far more likely that folks who value your product enough to want to crack it also don't have the time, and therefore are more interested in giving you money so that you can either give them the next feature they're looking for, fix the bug that's troubling them, or continue working, right? And so there'll be some people who, for example, use our product and don't have interest in anything that's available in Edge mode, don't necessarily have interest in Pro, because right now Pro works with Synthesis and Genesis, and if you're using Synthesis hosting and from the Copyblogger guys, and you obviously have Genesis, it's going to automatically accelerate your website and then make it easier for WordPress to generate pages more quickly, and then obviously you can even tweak settings even further to go even faster depending on what you're doing with your Genesis site. So anyway, there's all these cases where it just doesn't make sense for people to try to take advantage, because they can't necessarily continue to reap those advantages even if they found the time to crack the software. So yeah, it's a great question. I don't think it's worth the time of authors or contributors to spend time trying to thwart or unnecessarily make difficult cracking or unlocking or whatever your software. Spend time on and relish in the fact that it's really hard for people to create your software, and if someone wants to even think about taking time to do it, it means you probably need to work harder and faster because you're onto something. So the other thing I wanted to share with you guys, hopefully this is also helpful, is that when you spend a lot of time working in distributed software in particular, one of the biggest challenges that you face is lack of time. And so, the biggest thing for us in kind of time management has been figuring out what we say no to. And so I think, if I had to pick a single thing, I think the thing that we've mostly said no to is spending time in the forums. And so what isn't super obvious is that, software like Slack, which I think is phenomenal. I wish I had a similar product so I could say, look, I would make a product like that too without sounding like an ass. But if I was able to make software like that with a team and I had a passion for solving that problem, I would make software that good, and just the way that they did. But anyway, Slack is awesome. If there was a way for all the forum activity to, in a kind of seamless way, and a workflow that made sense to me, to use software like that to centralize the activity in social media, Twitter, Facebook, etc., and then also pull in forum posts, and then also kind of dial in the signal and dial out the noise in terms of what people or the questions that I know that I can answer, and then also tie that into some network of folks that I know, are able to address certain issues, and then kind of like Zendesk, tie that into a number of tools that had kind of canned responses that I can use as a starting point or template to address people's issues. Then we'd love to spend more time in the forums. And I'm sure there's a tool like that, and maybe someone's going to mention it, and then they'll change my life, and that'll be awesome. But for now, we've intentionally not spent that time, and it's a pitfall, right? When you have a community and there's an open forum, people think that that forum is the place to go to ask for help or complain about things or whatever. And when you don't engage in that community to a sufficient degree, it's for many people who, for better or for worse, think that the time of the software creator is plentiful, which it never is. It becomes dangerous. On the conversely, if you're active in the forums, people fall in love with you. So the way that I handled it was, I'd spend time in the forum, contiguous periods of time, just wrestling with lots and lots and lots of issues. I would queue up either I would kind of use that to prioritize known issues that were in the backlog, or I would obviously add new issues to the backlog and try to infer their priority. And so the forums, even without interacting with them, spending time crafting responses to everyone, does serve a purpose in helping to prioritize the backlog. Because when I sat down, I think I just moved to Florence, Italy, I sat down in one of the first places that we stayed, and I was like, well, I was still working at Mashable, and I was like, I need to go ahead and like take some of these things I learned and start sharing it. And so I think I wrote, not like fully fleshed out epics, if you know Agile, not like epic tickets, but I wrote in like several hundred tickets in addition to the FAQ, which has been largely unchanged since, for the past 4 to 5 years. And that's how I knew I was really passionate about solving this problem. So forums and engaging in them, whether it's your own or the community ones, is definitely a pitfall if you don't engage at all, or at least to use it to inform your priorities. And certainly, if another pitfall is how you direct people to the proper place to get support. And again, part of that is what you say no to. Like, no, you can't call me. Yes, you can email me. Use only this form. If you use any other form, I won't help you. Things like that. What is the biggest mistake you've made recently when making a decision you felt confident in and thought it was the best route, and how did you learn from it? Well, that happens every day. I think one of the skills that one develops, and I'm not a parent yet, but I'm sure parents understand this even better than I do, is you kind of have to have an amorphous outlook on things. By that I mean you have to have and develop the skill of having kind of the ability to see the gray and to know that making a decision just allows you to determine if you're right or wrong based on evidence over a period of time. And if you're not too committed to any particular direction, meaning if you don't put your ego into it and you don't take it personally, it often works out quite well because you're just experimenting. You say, hey, I'm going to try this and see how it works. So I think the biggest mistake would be, the biggest mistake that we still make is we don't make smaller releases. And the reason why we still don't do that, although it is still the current goal and why we have created Edge mode for experimenting, is because distributed software has this negative reinforcement cycle, which is like where you release something and then because it's distributed software and because like there's no, and maybe there could be with all the Vagrant stuff which is happening now, which is so cool, there's no like continuous integration so you can test every possible permutation or even like a large cohort of permutations of environments that one would have their website in. And so I don't really expect that to happen. And it's kind of a to what degree problem. Like there's too many areas of diminishing returns, and even analyzing the statistics on this stuff to like figure out what the 80% or 70% coverage would look like would just be hard. I mean, we'd all spend most of our time waiting for whatever that system that did that automated testing. We'd spend most of our time waiting for it to come back to us, like people who worked on computers when they used to be as big as office buildings. So maybe there's a solution there, but anyway, the answer is waiting too long to get releases out and being kind of encouraged to spend more time crafting a release because of the likelihood of having to push out another release immediately for the people that were impacted by something. And it still doesn't necessarily address people who haven't noticed that they need to update. And so maybe they get something for free, but usually there's still something else. So release often and have a mechanism for testing that works for you, which does require some duplication across the software contributors, but it's necessary. So hopefully Vagrant and other tools will allow people to come together and software developers to get more value or share value amongst each other the same way they're trying to create value, save time for users. Next question is, what's your best tip when it comes to attracting buzz for your products and services? Can you explain about some of the things that you did to attract more attention yourself? First thing I did was I got into a plugin contest. which I think I did well in. Obviously, I didn't win. Otherwise, I'd say already that I had won. But it was an interesting experience, and rallying people I knew to vote for it, which brought awareness. I think early on, there was already WP Super Cash, which solves a slightly different problem, but remains in the category nonetheless. And I didn't necessarily look to that product, but I was a significantly disadvantaged because it's always featured, right? So discovery was, won't say unnecessarily, but it was super challenging. So I think the next big thing that I did is I went to all the folks that I could find that had communities or large audiences, and I offered my services for free, right? That's what you do. You get social proof. And so I'd go spend the time like dialing in Chris Coyer's sites from CSS Tricks, Smashing Magazine for a period of time used W3 Total Cash, Steve Souders used it, Matt Cutts used it, so I'd make the rounds trying to provide value, which also helped me learn about how people use the product, and I would spend that time, and then I'd ask them if they would help, right? And they did. They would give a tweet or write something, and then eventually folks asked me to write guest posts, and so on and so forth, all over the place. And so that proved beneficial, and then obviously I spent a lot of time in the early days making sure that the ratings of the product were good, which obviously means that when people discover you, either in WordPress.org or WordPress, the application proper, they would be more likely to download it there, right? And then probably the thing that I'm particularly happy with, it's totally counterintuitive, is after you use the product for 30 days, it has an overlay that appears when you're inside of one of the W3 Total Cash settings pages that's like, hey, support us, it's free, right? Which allows people to continue reading, because if it's not free, they think you want money, which, money is helpful. But anyway, so what I would ask people to do is I'd say, hey, click this link to tweet this thing, right? And so they tweet a link with a hashtag, and hopefully other people see it, and if they are listening to like the WordPress hashtag or whatever, following it, then that they would I'd have this third-party credibility of people who use the product and have used it for 30 days, which I don't know if that's necessarily the threshold with which to use for characterizing a happy customer, but it is a significant period of time, and so folks did that. They also added links to their footer, which is also available in that overlay. And no follows actually still caused me some trouble in SEO, which was disappointing. But and there was a number of other things like that I did. So hopefully that's helpful. What is your best tip when it comes to? Oh, you already said that. In terms of selling WordPress plugins, what model do you prefer? Core plugin and add-ons, or one big plugin with all the features? So I do all of them. So my thought process is I wanted to make a product that was a framework, kind of a Swiss Army knife. I tried to make installation instructions that were bulletproof. Turns out people don't read directions, and so then they get mad at you when things don't go well. So that's rough. But anyway, I think wanted to give away a core plugin that demonstrated all the key, or that helped anyone satisfy or begin to ameliorate all of the kind of core issues that you would have in performance. So it was clear that it was a comprehensive solution. So that was thing one. Then thing two was I realized that now that it had been vetted, right, there's a number of sites using it in various ways, solving lots of problems. Sometimes people don't even understand how many problems it is solving for you just out of the box for free. Because, I don't know, I guess you would have to ask more questions, or I'd have to provide more information, or we'd all have to be more patient with each other, whatever. They even mix other performance plugins that they don't necessarily need. But even when they do that, the product still is able to function because it's modular enough. And then, we decided to add edge mode so we could do experiments. We decided to add an extension framework, which has been proven by guys who really know what they're doing, like Pippin. And so that means that we can kind of pull out things that had been core components that were either not used or not used by a lot of folks, based on our experience, and kind of tuck those away and let people seek them out and enable them manually. Some of them are enabled by default, but they're still extensions because they're kind of like peripheral and they're floating around and they don't hurt anybody. They only help, kind of like a Kismet or something like that. And then obviously it opens up, the extension framework opens up the opportunity for contributors to solve their own problems. So like if I was, I don't know, Akamai or like Amazon CloudFront or something like that, I would take W3 Total Cache and I would, write an extension that would make people opt in to enabling everything except for the CDN functionality, and I would hide all the other CDN providers, and I would make some more changes probably to make it easier to create a new account and to configure your existing account for CloudFront, for example, and I would distribute that. And the extension framework allows for that sort of thing. And so, no new concept, but I think core plugin plus add-ons or extensions is the way to go. And generally speaking, big is a relative thing, right? So, some users are overwhelmed with, most people are overwhelmed with W3 Total Cache because of all the options. Sadly, that was intentional. That's beta. And if we don't present people with the options that we think make sense, because there's a lot of things that you can tweak in the settings file that you can't tweak in the UI. There's a lot of decisions that it makes in order to do the stuff that it does. Still, we expose those things that I've had to use myself in order to tune sites, or I know that people have asked for control over. And so you end up still with a pretty large, at least interface for people, and they see that as a big plugin. And most people, despite how daunting it is to have lots of options, even when there's defaults selected, and every single option tells you what it is, it has a caption and stuff like that, it's still felt as a big plugin, but people are appreciative of that, I think, is the thing to take away. Smaller plugins doesn't mean they're bad. You still have all the same risks in terms of playing nicely with other products and so on and so forth. So I err on the side of trying to create the value that you intend and not really necessarily focus on size. Let's see. How do you handle support? Do you have dedicated support reps? We don't have dedicated support reps. So Willie Jackson and I field most of the support. We've tried to have people in the past help out. Many of the in terms of being on our team and not just being generous souls. Support, we're not spending a lot of time on the forum like I talked about earlier. We do use the forum to inform our priorities, but generally speaking, we're looking for email support, and even that is pretty daunting, especially when you're really focused in on the next release. So the way that we think about support is, and part of why we made Edge Mode, is we want to make sure that every release kind of remains stable and you get the security fixes and enhancements and streamlined implementations or increased efficiency of the product. You get whatever the benefits, the core kind of primitive or immutable benefits are that are not going to negatively impact what you're trying to achieve. You just get those, and then you can have not new options, but new capabilities available that either keep up with the industry and the market and the needs of folks, but also just make a more reliable, consistent kind of product. So the answer that I'm kind of trying to share here is that we focus on not necessarily trying to field every question, because we literally can't. It's not because they're technical, they're hard, or customers really don't understand optimization and performance and stuff like that. It's because every single time someone writes in, we have to think about their content, their plugin, their themes, and their server in order to not have 50 questions back and forth with them, because every site is a snowflake. And so anybody that tells you that it isn't intending to create the same value that we are, right? So WordPress itself is the same thing. It's like, hey, can I have a WordPress? Sure. Now what? You've got a bazillion options. And by that I mean decisions to make about what you want and what you don't want. So we think about support in terms of what we can do better that makes people not ask questions, and there's a fine line between solving a problem where people don't necessarily appreciate the value that you created, or conspicuously creating value. Our goal is more often than not to conspicuously create value, and so in the world of speed, that's pretty straightforward. Although speed is relative. With current goals, ambitions, where do you see W3 Edge in 1 to 2 years' time? That's a good question. I actually don't think about it a lot. I think about getting to 1.0 of W3 Total Cast, really, and and I think a lot about what some of our partners and customers are looking for, and making sure that it's really easy for them to focus on their customers and the value that they're trying to create, doing whatever it is that they do. If I had to pick one thing, I think probably the next big thing I'd want to improve is the licensing system. Right now we use easy digital downloads, but that still has a lot of friction. Even though, I think Pippin mentioned this to me directly, even though we've kind of removed some of the steps that you would have to go through to obtain your license key through customizing that product, there's still a lot of friction, and I think that friction is based on the integrations that, excuse me, and I just saw one come through Slack right now, based on some of the issues that we have with onboarding. I think there's still a lot of friction in people trying to unlock functionality in the product or just subscribe to it to support us. And so that just needs to go away, right? It's like, every time you left your house, if you had to like wait in line to leave your house, that would be an awful lot of friction just to go get the mail, right? And so we need to figure out that. I think that's the largest issue. Once that issue is kind of improved or ameliorated, there's a number of other products that we'd like to focus on. We have a social media analytics product that we don't spend a lot of time on, but we've used it with like Coca-Cola and some other brands doing social listening and stuff like that. And so we'd like to finish our community version and get that out. And so we'd focus on, those two key areas of optimization. Probably those are the two things we're most passionate about. I spent most of my time at Mashable working on those things. That'd probably be the biggest thing that we'd be after over the next couple of years, and hopefully it'll become easier over time to to have people to subscribe and support the product, because at the end of the day, not everyone is either interested in or can do what like Blue Things has done, and a number of other theme clubs and so on, and now e-commerce is even easier with their product, for example. So there's a lot of challenges that publishers or folks who are trying to use the web have, and for now we're really pleased with focusing on these two key areas that we're passionate about. So since there's no other questions right now, I was just going to say that one of the biggest pitfalls is not listening to people that complain. And so there's always people who complain, and the thing that's totally counterintuitive, and I think even Bill Gates has a pretty famous quote about this, is says something like, "Hey, your biggest complainers are your I forget the actual quote, but it's something along the lines of, hey, you should listen to the people who are complaining, and because they're basically your secret weapon, right? They're giving you an awful lot of value." The thing that quote doesn't say, or that people typically don't say when they say things like this, is that most people don't complain, right? So you've got distributed software, you've got people who, aren't necessarily going to take the time to find the channel. Again, this is all about friction, to actually an interest, to complain to you and even feel confident in trying to characterize the issue that they're having. They rather just silently fail, like some kind of Unix, helper, some Unix app, and then wander off into the next thing. And so the people who complain and are really upset, I mean, first thing to do, calm down. Second thing is, tell me what you were doing. And then third thing is, tell me what's upsetting and what it is that you expected. That is, that's user acceptance testing. That's awesome. That's what you need. That's gold. It's not fun to talk to those people when they're really upset, especially when it's like, hey man, this was free, or hey man, this was not super expensive. You can still use the free version and get a lot of value, but that's a thing that I think needs a lot, like as a community, that we should, embrace more, is running towards the complaints. And some of them are, unfounded, and that's tricky. There's a judgment call there, but that's a thing that we appreciate. Question is, can you give me an impression of the time it took you to get a business up and running to earn enough to pay your bills? Do you have any tip on what you would do different now that now looking back? So biggest thing is recurring revenue. So if you're trying to get off the ground, figure out a way to create value that people want to subscribe to. It's possible to do it with services. It's possible to do it, obviously, with the software itself. There's lots of tools that make it super easy to start doing that. I think that's the biggest thing that I recommend to entrepreneurs or people who just want to spend their life focused on software and the community. Figure out how to do that, get that recurring revenue where you need it to be. Other than that, it's everything that you know, right? So if you know how to perform some kind of service and help someone with a thing, also do that, right? So the thing about monthly recurring subscriptions and revenue is that you're still going to get money every day as long as your services are up or your software is not buggy in the latest version of whatever it interacts with, and off you go. And then alongside of that, consult. And then as you do those things, rinse and repeat, and you get really good and efficient at them, and you develop some skills, things get easier, and you find that you have more time to develop more skills. So the time it took, I actually started off in web hosting, in like 2002, 2003, and that was, going to friends and family and being like, hey, you can put your website on my server. So that was monthly recurring revenue, and that didn't take that long. Got a virtual server before they were remotely as cool as they are today, and went from there. But it's, I can't really, it's been like, I've been an entrepreneur for like 12 years. I can't really remember accurately the period of time it took to do a specific thing. I think I worked on W3 Total Cash, the first version. I worked on that for about 60 days for the release that ended up being entered into the contest. And the first release, had the ability to have people pay me through PayPal for professional services in that first release, to try to answer that question. And how big is the team? The team at one point was 53, and pieces of our business units have been sold over a period of time. The team right now is really small. We're focused only on software now. We don't really do professional services unless a project is really interesting and we're going to learn something from it that allows us to make better products. Which does happen quite a bit. So yeah, the team is much smaller now, and we're going to focus on growing organically to be able to have, for example, a full-on dedicated support person, and to do that, we also want to have some tools to make their life pretty enjoyable. But generally speaking, we don't really spend a lot of time on the PR and the marketing. I spend a lot of time on the business development end. But we're really just focused on trying to get this next release out and take all the learning that we've had since the last one and make it easy for people to spend time making their site perform better. So with that, I'm probably nearly out of time. This has been super. I wish I hadn't missed it last year. If you guys have any other questions, you can write to hello@w3edge.com. We'll get some questions answered. And if you're trying to use our product and having some trouble or want to become an expert at it, we can figure out how to help you with that. Other than that, hopefully we can do this again. You guys are awesome. This is even smoother than the last time that I remember, so very cool. Actually, let me see if I have anything else since I've got 1 minute. I guess the last big thing is iteration. Whatever you have the ability to do quickly, or whatever you do slowly in your workflow, whether that is gathering all the support information, figuring out which issues are duplicate, which issues are not, figuring out like running things through your test suite, and you should use continuous integration. You should try to keep things as simple as possible. But figuring out what you can do when you are distributing software, or figuring out how to make your distributed software have a hosted component so that you can iterate more quickly, That's probably the biggest thing that, I encourage folks to do outside of figuring out what kind of features and functionality folks would subscribe to, especially if it means not having people try to subscribe to support. Support doesn't scale. It won't ever scale. You can make a team to try to make it scale. It's really hard. You're going to have to say no to a lot of things, is all I really mean. Some of those things you won't feel good about saying no to. But generally speaking, figuring out whether it's hosting some of the software or not, what you can do to make your iteration cycles faster is really the secret weapon. Okay, because no one's perfect, and there's too many things changing. So the way to do it, where it is be successful, is really to figure out the things you do slowly in your process and improve how effective you are at taking in new information and making it actionable, even if you're just a team of one. Other than that, I think the biggest thing that we wish we could do more of is we wish we could, and I don't know of anyone who's unable to avoid this problem. I wish we could push out a release and not find, some significant portion of folks negatively impacted by something that we just can't know. Right? We can't set up enough continuous integration stuff, systems. We just finished another round of really large updates. We added another, 100 checks of various environments. I already know it won't be nearly enough to catch some of the things that we just don't know that we don't know in some of these environments that are out there. But what we do know is that when you're able to even use some of the same defaults, irrespective of the fact that when you use some of the tools out there, keep in mind, they don't necessarily consider your content, your theme, your plugin, obviously your server, and most critically your intentions, right? So if you're going for that 100 score, for example, it doesn't mean that your site is totally dialed, right? Your site is dialed by, like making decisions and determining what you're going to say no to. And so, to go from, iterating to what you say no to and how to measure success for a website, the reason why those things line up in my mind is because what we'd love to do is we'd love to have some tools that help you think through how well is your content doing, right? Which is why we're going to work on our other optimization product eventually. How are your themes and plugins behaving? And then the last thing is, what is your server doing or not doing for you? Okay, there's sites, that are e-commerce sites that have forums in them, or like, BBPress or BuddyPress and things like this, or like WooCommerce or WPML, for example, for localization, various versions of language. And so it's super tricky in those cases because caching pages or any type of caching that is not server level is super problematic, right? And you want to have, in a perfect world, especially with mobile devices today, even with Speedy and all these wonderful things to try to reduce the time it takes to see the content that the user is after, you still end up with all this adversity because, PHP, let's be honest, it's slow. Most languages are slow. We can't write websites in C, right? So we got to use some kind of language, and WordPress, part of its value, part of the advantage, the shoulders that we're standing on, is this backwards compatibility, right? They've figured out, the core team, right, has figured out over the years how to make the software run everywhere, and all we've got to do is like figure out how to make software that doesn't break WordPress when we release it, and everything's great. So, at the end of the day, the biggest thing at the end of all that stream of consciousness is that if we could, if we could figure out how to make sure that there's a frictionless experience where people can understand what things they should care about in their minus 5-minute warning. If people could figure out what it is that they should care about for their site, that's one thing that we're kind of working on as it relates to the content, the plugins, the theme, the server. And hopefully if we can find that solution, I think what we'll see is a lot of people that are less confused about what it is that they need to do, because best practices and principles are things that are always true, except when they're not. right? So it's the same thing as like, hey, what do we say no to? What things are we not going to do? Hey, Mr. Customer, we understand that that's valuable to you. We understand that we agree that that's important, but we're not going to do that. Talk to John or Frank or something. They'll do that, right? What you say no to and how you design these things is critical. Unfortunately, there's no formula for it, right? So if you are agile in the sense that you're iterating quickly, you can say no to things, change your mind. We see it all the time, right? Who's joined a theme club that's changed their business model? Let me say that differently. Who hasn't joined a theme club that has changed their business model, right? Do I fault those guys for that? No. Part of what happens is your model works for a period of time and then it doesn't. You know what I mean? It's like, could you go to 6th grade every year and like get smarter? No. Things need to change. So that's one thing that we're really excited about, is being able to focus on releasing more quickly, and potentially some hosted services, like for example this Amazon Web Services Lambda thing, where they have this JavaScript kind of container that like in 50 or 100 milliseconds or whatever like spins up and executes code in this little container and like can talk to other AWS services. That kind of thing is phenomenal. So in no way, shape, or form am I saying that WordPress should have some capability like that, but I'm just saying like that's a really interesting thing in the cloud. You can build some incredible services. You need a lot of infrastructure around it. Like it's not trivial to stand up a service in that way, but you can have tons and tons of concurrency with the right kind of architecture. That is absolutely amazing, and it's not surprising that Amazon has done that. And then on top of it, and this is not an Amazon ad or anything, but these are the kinds of things to think about when you're trying to build a business or trying to improve your business model. Amazon's reduced all their pricing, and they make it easier to get discounted pricing, no doubt due to the pressure from Google and Azure. But either way, it's there's a lot of interesting ways to to layer in professional services, subscription revenue, support channel revenue, and and figure out how you can be impactful and get your business off the ground, so you don't have to do two things. You can focus on your software and your customers. So anyway, I was able to ramble on there, and I enjoyed it. Hopefully this is helpful to folks. And with that, I hope I can see you guys next time.